وليد الختام مع حضرتك.
اهلا يا دكتور وليد.
نبتدي ان شاء الله.
نبتدي يعني when you're ready.
Okay, we are ready now. Okay, so today is my pleasure to have Professor Ahmed Ghunaim giving us his lecture. Professor Ahmed Ghunaim is a well-known figure in the energy field. Let me introduce him with a couple of words which will not give him the full information about him. So Professor Ahmed Ghunaim is the Ronald Kram Professor of Mechanical Engineering. He is the principal investigator and director of research of the Center of Excellence in Energy, director of the Center for Energy and Propulsion Research, and the Research and the Reacting Gas Dynamic Laboratory at MIT. He received his bachelor and master degree from Cairo University and his PhD degree from University of California, Berkeley. His research covers several areas, and especially the clean energy and the combustion with focus on CO2 capture, renewable energy and alternative fuels, and computational engineering. Professor Ghunaim has more than 130 master's and PhD and postdoctoral students supervision. He published over than 500 refereed articles in well-known publications and journals. He is also a fellow in several worldwide known organizations. So, Professor Ahmed, the floor is yours. Okay, and let us enjoy your presentation. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Walid Al-Khattam. صباح الخير أو مساء الخير المستمعين. أنا اللكتشر هتبقى بإنجليزي I will switch now. Thank you very much, Dr. Walid Al-Khattam, for this very nice and generous introduction. And I'd like to thank the organizing committee for inviting me to give this talk. I'm very happy to be back, although over cyberspace, talking with my friends and colleagues in Ain Shams University. I spent the last couple of years working with them very closely and extensively to start a center of excellence in energy. I learned a lot from them, and we had a very nice and interesting journey. And in fact, my talk today will be around the journey we've had together in attempting or in establishing actually the Center of Excellence in Energy. Again, I'm delighted to be back talking with all of you. Hope you will enjoy my talk today. The talk today is obviously a very high-level discussion around the theme of the conference that you asked me to talk about, which is my views on the university in the 21st century. I will focus very much on what the vision of a university or a undergraduate and graduate post high school education and the overlap intersection between education and research in the university, how we seek excellence, if you like, and tools by which we try to achieve it. And just to put things in perspective, let me start with what I would call the journey. And the journey summarizes my talk today. Why I chose this topic and how I came to think about this topic. As some of you know, I led the effort to establish the Center of Excellence in Energy in Ain Shams. And I'd like to give you a bit of background how I got thinking about that center. Obviously, I started thinking about it because of my interest in sort of the role of universities and how to move universities forward and how to establish compatibility between the needs of society in the 21st century and graduate education. Of course, I'm an engineer and I work in an engineering school, so I was interested in particular in engineering education and research, and the connection between engineering, research, and education, economic development in the country, and overall sort of addressing human needs in the 21st century. In order to encapsulate the ideas in a coherent theme, I will talk about a paradigm called convergence, which I used when I was thinking about the development of the center of energy. In the second part of the talk, I will tell you a bit more about how I used what I learned by reviewing all of the material on the University for the 21st Century, engineering education and conversion, and how I applied that in collaboration with our partner universities to establish the center, how we went about writing the proposal, mobilization of the effort, and I got into some early implementation. And I will wrap up by talking about our response to COVID, and again, how we applied many of these lessons in the process. So where do we start? We are interested in the university, so we do need to remind ourselves of the definition of the mission of the university. That's always a starting point, right? So what do we do in the university? First and foremost, we produce educated citizens. Our primary product in the university is our graduates, whether they graduate with an undergraduate degree or a graduate degree. That's what we deliver to society for what they pay us to deliver. It doesn't stop here. Universities actually started way back, and many of you know that Al-Azhar University was probably the first university in the modern sense of the word in the world. The university mission also is to generate knowledge. Generate may be a very strong word, maybe we should say expand knowledge. We're constantly trying to push the frontier of knowledge to add more and more to it. Ultimately, between the production of educated citizens and of knowledge, we try to serve our communities. We try to participate in the economic, social aspects of our society and serve in any way we can by participating with industry, with government, with social organization, with educational institution to serve our community. Well, how do we do that? How does the university do this? The university works on developing a curriculum. We educate the student by developing a curriculum. We put a structure around the curriculum, and we add content in order to fulfill our mission. Besides the curriculum, which basically has that goal of producing the educated citizens, we do lots of research to advance the knowledge, the number two part of our mission. We do a lot of scholarship, we write books, we write publications, we disseminate our knowledge by putting out this scholarship material. Of course, between the curriculum and the research and the scholarship, we do quite a bit of teaching. Many of us feel that this is kind of our primary mission, is to teach. But lately we have been thinking about not just teaching, but also learning. And we'll talk about that a bit more. Of course, we have to develop an infrastructure for our operation, for our universities. We have to have labs and spaces. First and foremost, we have to teach the teachers. So we're constantly working on generating new ranks of professors, faculty members, try to improve their qualifications so that they can achieve their mission, as well as get them engaged in in the mission of the university. So these are sort of time-tested traditions, if you like, of universities. Well, in the 21st century, where we live now, universities decided that we must remain relevant. And to remain relevant, we have to renew ourselves. We have to start thinking big. And part of the thinking big is to work on what we call grand challenges. Grand challenges have always been defined as persistent needs of humanities, things that we always need as human beings trying to live better. Some of them are obvious: energy, food, water, climate, health, eradicating poverty. These are global human needs and human problems that are very challenging and also require significant effort. And universities recently have been looking, by recent I mean in the past 20, 30 years, have been looking at ways of addressing these grand challenges. Universities have also decided that the world is moving towards globalization and internationalization, that with the new tools of communication and transport, the world has become very small and we're constantly communicating with each other. And we do need to take advantage of those as well as deliver our services through those. Universities and society actually has decided that knowledge that the university produces is a resource, very much like natural resources. So society think of natural resources as oil or minerals or even agricultural resources, water resources. Turns out that knowledge itself often translates into a resource, is a way of improving the wealth of the society. So universities have started looking at converting knowledge, monetizing knowledge into a resource, not just for the abstract interest. In order to achieve this, universities have also started thinking about training students, not just to improve their way of thinking, but also translating thinking into actual products, what we call manpower and mind power, or mind power and manpower. At MIT, we're fond of the word manus, and manus translates into mind and labor, as you see in our emblem. Universities have also decided that education is no longer 8 to 5, it's really 24 hours a day. We can put the educational material on the web, have it accessible for those who would like to use them or benefit from them any time of the day, any day of the week. Finally, and I say most prominently, that universities now empower entrepreneurship, translating knowledge into products and services that graduates can offer their societies to advance them. And in order to empower entrepreneurships, we need to start with our undergraduates or with our students at a very early stages to help them think about how to translate knowledge into products and services. So these are sort of high-level objectives, high-level goals that we're working towards. Well, how do we implement those goals? How do we move forward with these goals? Things are changing and new things are being used. New ideas and concepts are being used. And some of them are summarized here. For instance, we find at this point that education is no longer a fixed menu. It has to be much more flexible. students come with many backgrounds and many mindsets, and education has to be adaptable. Students need to pick and choose from large menu in order to train themselves towards these goals. We find that online education is becoming more and more important. And we learned during COVID time that synchronous as well as synchronous lecturing can help us achieve our goals. In fact, many of us at this point feel that asynchronous lecturing, even for post-COVID time, may not be a bad way of delivering some of our content, so that we leave the lecture time for discussions, problem solving, and interactions. Universities currently are working hard to create what we call lifelong learning experience for the students and the graduates that are alumni, people graduating and leaving the universities, working in wherever they work for many, many years, still need to learn, continue to learn, because knowledge is expanding and tools are being developed and needs are growing. And unless we have that life learning model applied, they stop learning and they no longer benefit from us, and we are no longer relevant to them. With that, obviously, the whole idea of building networks among our students and alumni, networks among universities, between different universities, whether these universities are local within their own countries or regions, or global, is very important in order to cross-fertilize between different communities. We find that there is huge emphasis at this point on what we call communication, team working, and interpersonal skills. And I will talk more and more about that as we move on, but hopefully you see the point. Ultimately, we find that educating students in a very specialized way is the most useful preparation for them, since they typically work on complex problems that require knowledge from different disciplines. Now, we need to focus a bit more and look at engineering, since this is sort of the mission of my own effort. And again, like what we define universities, I wanted to start by defining engineering. What is really engineering, and how do we consider it in sort of the 21st century, if you like? Well, engineering has always been about problem solving. As engineers, we use science, data, and common sense, obviously, in order to very important that we're not really day-to-day developing new science. We're just applying science organized in ways that makes the process of applying science effective and efficient to solve problems. We do that in a very methodical way, and that's what we try to teach our students. When we're confronted with a problem, we define objectives, and we kind of define what are the desirable outcomes. Where do we need to go at the end of the day when we solve these problems? In order to help us solve the problem with analysis and analytics, we create models, and the models are a way of helping the design or supporting the design process. Obviously, not a single solution is always the best. Sometimes we come up with multiple solutions. Then we do prototyping, scaling, manufacturing, and examine whether that all fits what we are going after. Obviously, you come up with a solution and you don't walk away. There's always a follow-up. You need to find out at some point whether the solution you proposed is indeed satisfying its goal. And if it's not, We need to reiterate, we need to revisit the design, suggest improvements, and what we call re-engineer. So that's at a very high level how we think about engineering. And one issue that is very important for us is how do we use all of this to design the engineering education environment in order to make it happen and to prepare the students for following this sort of grand goal. So to summarize, I would say what we do best in engineering education, sort of the hallmarks or the roadmap in engineering education that has been tested and agreed to be optimal in some sense approach is the number of points I'm listing here. One of them is in engineering research, in engineering education. We try to integrate research and teaching. Since engineering products and systems are constantly moving forward, helped by research, we do need to bring some of the results of our research into our teaching and learning to prepare the students who will be working for the next 40 years in the field to address the important problems in this field. We find in engineering education that we need to follow an interdisciplinary approach to both research and engineering. Engineering grand challenges are complex problems that cannot be solved by only one field or one discipline. You typically need to understand something about other disciplines. You need to be willing to collaborate and interact with other schools, in fact, all the way to science and humanities. We always find that in order to create this kind of mindset of interdisciplinarity, we need to have our own infrastructure help that. So the buildings, even the buildings we live in, need to integrate these disciplines to have many of us talk to each other instead of being isolated in our own silos. We need to constantly create new centers or initiatives or colleges that support this interdisciplinarity. We do two things that are very important in engineering. We connect very strongly with industry, and we also connect with the government. We connect with industry because industry actually applies our knowledge, and we need to know from them whether the knowledge we're developing is helping or not. If it's not, why, and how can we improve our processes to help them. We also connect very strongly with the government because our products don't live in vacuum. They actually live in a regulatory environment that's set by the government. Also, the government typically provides us with funding and policy and so on that we need to be part of. Now, engineering education is evolving and is changing in response to the challenges that we talked about in the beginning with regard to the 21st century grand challenges. So there's constant effort to reform the curriculum. The curriculum of today, in my past 40 years or so, I have been through at least two major changes in the curriculum of the department I work in. And that's not unusual. People find within 10 to 20 years, it's very important to revisit the curriculum structure and content and make changes to improve and address new problems. It's also important to innovate in the learning experience from the way the students themselves learning, focus on fundamentals versus versus case studies versus design versus analytics versus digital tools and experiments. All of these things are evolving, and they need to be sort of integrated very well into the curriculum. The focus recently has been on what we call learning, whether the students actually learn what we're trying to teach them or not. That's always been a big question. So a certain amount of certain initiatives that are focused more on testing and examining what the students learn on their own and with our help in order to improve both the experience as well as the curriculum. Very much focus on the whole creativity and innovation. So you need to integrate the concepts of design into many courses and try to force the idea that fundamentals are not taught for fundamental sake, but they're taught to solve problems. The whole assessment thing is, again, not necessarily just to tell the student that they're not learning, but in order to discover where experiments succeed or fail and revise the processes in order to help them. Eventually, and ultimately, it is in educating the engineering faculty themselves, whether the new junior faculty joining, junior professor joining the faculty, or senior faculty who have been around for a while, but they also have to address other challenges. Should say that in terms of thinking about all of this, I started trying to figure out, all right, how am I going to approach this? How do we get all of this in a way that allows me to think about the center activities in ways that makes it possible within a finite period of time to implement change. And I came across this concept of conversion that was studied very extensively at MIT in the early 2000s. At the time when life sciences, biological sciences were growing very fast, and its application to biology and medical sciences was growing very fast, helped very much by merging life sciences with physical and engineering sciences. Again, the whole idea was, how do you integrate knowledge from different disciplines and different ideas and different departments and schools in ways that advance the field, but also allows application of the knowledge as quickly as possible. And I came across that because it was posed as a way to challenge the traditional structure of universities. Again, if you want to change something, you want to think about challenging the existing structure and make and force people to think about whether the existing structure is satisfying the goal or not. And while it started at MIT, it went all the way up the government ladder, all the way to President Obama at the time, who actually endorsed that as an approach to improve both education and research structure of the university in order to, again, objective of translating scientific breakthroughs into actual solution. And many reports were written, and I went through many of them to show how convergence concept, which started in the medical and biological sciences, can be applied to many other areas, such as energy, water, and food. And I came across what became known as Helmier Catechism. This man was a program manager, research program manager, in one of the major funding agencies in the US for supporting research. And he came up with a list of principles, if you like, that, or questions or statements that he always put in front of people who came to him to propose research ideas. He had a lot of funding to give. So people would go to him and say, support me to do research in this area or that area. And he would give them this list of questions and ask them to come up with answers. And if the answers made sense, then their work should be supported. His first principle was, her first question was, what are the objectives? Why are you proposing to do the research you want to do? And tell me these objectives without any jargon. I just want a straight talk about objective research. And if you're going to propose to do research in some areas, tell me what's known now, and tell me why what's known now and what's being done to solve this problem is not working as well. Tell me what is a new approach and why do you believe it's going to be successful. First and foremost, tell me who cares. If you solve this problem, so what? So what if we come up with another solution? What difference will it make? Of course, it's very important to talk about the risks and payoffs, and it's important to talk about how much it will cost and how long it will take. Ultimately, you should tell me sort of the steps we're going to take while we're doing this research to check whether we're going to achieve our goal or not. In terms of implementing this concept in the whole convergence paradigm, the recommendation was that we need to create a convergence ecosystem. We have to be able to explain all of this to our researchers. We have to connect our researchers with our funders, and we have to encourage a think tank environment. Again, problem solving. Ultimately, we are after problem solving. The review process and the selection of research has to follow the same set of ideas that our ultimate objective is to create teams of researchers, develop dynamic collaboration among them in order to implement the concept of the disciplinarity in problem solving. We need to create a culture among our researchers, both the senior and the junior, to think about convergence as their approach to research. So now let's go back to where we started. Having gone through this kind of long process of educating myself of how a center of excellence can be structured to develop its goal of moving the university forward and getting the university to fit within the 21st century institution. As you know, there was a call for proposals from the SAID to develop Center of Excellence in Energy. We started writing the proposal in early 2018. MIT was selected, and we started commissioning our effort in early 2019. The startup phase was again 2019, towards the end of 2019. The implementation took place in 2020, and we handed over the center to Ain Shams University in late 2020. Now I'd like to tell you a bit more about these steps and what happened while we were doing that. So when I was asked to write the proposal, and on my own, I went through all of these studies of convergence and 21st century university and missions and goals and so on. I wanted to apply this to the process all the way from writing the proposal to the implementation. So we connected extensively with our stakeholders. We selected 3 different universities, Ain Shams, Mansoura, and Aswan. And we connected with the university administration in the 3 universities, but also with the faculty, researchers, and educators. I went about identifying within MIT, which is the implementing universities, groups that will help me implement the effort. And I was very much focused on groups that have had extensive experience in doing international collaborative applied research and education. Some of them are listed here. I also went about identifying MIT professors who will work with me to partner with our colleagues in Egypt to do the research, obviously based on their own research interests and experience. Because I was interested in making an impact on the economy and society, I communicated extensively with a number of Egyptian investment groups that were interested in investing in small startups to translate research into market ideas. I was very much interested in creating a local, within the Middle East region, network of universities that will, beyond the center establishment, continue to collaborate, and I contacted with them. Obviously, we had to have some local folks who had experience doing something similar to help us with the effort. Now, once we were selected, we went through the mobilization phase, initiating this effort. And the first part of the mobilization was to contact the government, because as I said before, the government does play a very important role in not only facilitating, but connecting the work within the university with the rest of the society. And we established high-level committees. The highest one included 4 ministers who were very much connected with the energy sector in Egypt. We had to learn about Egyptian laws, obviously governing the implementation of international collaboration. We established an LLC to manage the local operation and initiated effort to coordinate with our sponsor. In implementing a project like this, you have to be in close communication with your sponsor each step of the way to make sure that your processes are geared towards success. We also held several meetings with our partners to discuss the implementation. During the startup phase, beyond the mobilization, we had to create again, our own ecosystem within which we're going to interact, organized partner conferences at MIT. We brought a number of professors and administrators from Egypt to spend time at MIT to learn about the institute, its culture, what we do here, how we do it, and what we've done before, and what we would like to do in the future. We also organized a number of conferences in Egypt to, again, explain our objectives, what we had in mind doing, and what our proposed processes are, and get feedback on it. Very importantly, not only we connected with the government, but we also connected with a number of private sector companies to give us feedback again on both selection of topics and approaches, as well as to participate with us in the implementation. And of course, we developed a local, within MIT itself, a support structure to guide the process, for instance, of delivering content, proposal reviews, research coordination, and so on. In the early stages of the implementation, which was done late 2019 and in 2020, besides learning about the interest and ongoing activities of research in the Egyptian universities, we initiated the process of
Professor Ahmed.
Yeah.
Excuse me, due to the time limits, Can we conclude within the coming 5 minutes to allow for some questions?
All right, I will speed up. It may take me a bit more than 5 minutes, but I will speed up.
Okay.
So, yeah. Again, the whole idea of implementing this convergent concept was translated into requesting research proposals from faculty teams in Egypt, and matching them with faculty teams at MIT to work collaboratively in solving problems. And we went through two-step review process, both for the concept papers and sort of a short proposals, as well as final proposals. We also organized a number of what we called energy dialogues, conferences that brought in not only the researchers, but also government and private sector representatives to talk about the energy development ecosystem in Egypt. And some of the research projects that had been selected for funding or were selected for funding are listed here in topics that you might imagine are of importance in Egypt: wind and artificial intelligence, nanotechnology, sensors, and distributed networks, solar irrigation, biomass, and building material. In the educational side, we went through the development of curriculum and instruction committees. We organized several design-focused workshops. We discussed extensively the CDIO concept for organizing the curriculum. We did organize a workshop. Unfortunately, it was not done because of COVID. We did discuss and work on structure of new energy degree programs. We did discuss a mentorship program, educating the educators, so to speak, and requested a white paper from our partners of how they would like to see this done. Also discussed the idea of developing MOOCs. Finally, we went through an online workshop after COVID happened. And here I'm just showing the number of topics that were covered during COVID workshops. We exchanged. It was more of a two-way exchange with our partners in Egypt, how we are responding to COVID and how they are responding to COVID. Some new ideas about doing remote experiments, some remote assessment, how recent research helps our thinking in terms of delivering material and teaching content remotely. What the kind of new regulation, academic regulations, and so on that were under consideration. Now let me wrap up and think about where do we go from here. So hopefully you learned a bit about my own thinking about how to organize centers of excellence, how to take advantage of all the recent knowledge and research in the organization, and how I try to apply that in the establishment of the center that we handed over to Ain Shams in late 2020, that I'm very much hoping that will continue by their own strong effort. Moving forward, I'd like to leave you with a few ideas. One of them is, again, the university is about graduating technical leaders. Our engineers leaving the university should be thinking about their role as technical leadership. They need to learn to work in teams, organize collaboration. They need to have good communication skills to be able to both hear as well as respond to needs as they change. They need to be able to use capitals, both natural, intellectual, and financial. They should be innovators. They should learn how to handle complex problems, because societal problems are really concepts. They not only need to think about the technical content of their product, but also impact of the technical content on those who are going to be using it. That's sort of a super set of skills for these technical leaders. I also would like to leave you with some ideas about 21st century engineering challenges. So while we still are thinking about solar energy, we still are thinking about fusion energy, we still are thinking about carbon capture and storage, clean water, health informatics is becoming very important, better medicine. You know that the most important response to COVID was the development of the vaccine, and there was enormous amount of engineering involved in the development of the vaccine. Very important tools for scientific discovery, AI and machine learning and so on, virtual reality. The US National Academies have decided that these are really what we all need to think about and try to solve in order to meet our challenge in the 21st century. Now that we arrived at the end of my talk and the end of the journey, again, I'm hoping that I gave you a bit of my own journey for establishing the center over the past 2 years, how I came about thinking in terms of the implementation, what we have done to do early implementation for the center, and hopefully what we have left behind as a legacy that will Ayn Shams and his partners will build on, and finally how we responded within the context of the center to some of the early challenges of COVID. So with that, thank you. I'm happy to stay as long as you would like me to stay to answer questions.
Okay, thanks a lot, Professor Ghunaim. Really, I can't stop thinking about the whole ideas which you mentioned and the flow of information. Okay, thanks a lot for your extensive, informative presentation. I can't find the one word which we can start talking about, but what actually makes me interested is the interdisciplinarity. Especially we have a huge number of attendees now from different disciplines. So as you mentioned, we need to work together, not in the engineering field only, in all fields, to reach up with a better university for the future and better teaching for students, and ask them to have a capability of learning, not only to be a receiver for our lectures. Thanks a lot for your presentation again, and I allow me to open the floor for any questions. So do we have some questions here? I see some raising hands.
Dr. Walid, I apologize. We need to end the session for the next keynote speaker. Thank you so much.
Okay. Okay. Thanks a lot. So my apology for people who want to ask. Thanks again, Professor Ahmed, for your presentation, and unfortunately we are running out of time. Thanks a lot again.
Yeah, please send me any questions by email, and I promise to answer them as soon as I receive them.
Cool. Okay, thanks a lot. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hello? Hello?
دكتور هيام we are ready.
Okay.
مع حضرتك عبد الرحمن من ايرس يا دكتور، احنا جاهزين.
شكرا.
تمام يا دكتور. العفو.
Hi, Professor Victor. Shall we start now?
Can you give me
Professor-
15, 30, can you give me 15, 30 seconds and I'll set things up on my end?
Okay. Hi, Dr. Dina. How are you?
Hi, Dr. Hayam. How are you? Alhamdulillah.
Hi, alhamdulillah.
All is
I'm sorry for this delay. I think some technical problems.
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay.
Well, so this concludes the conference today, or there are still more sessions coming up?
No, this is the ending of our sessions today. Tomorrow we will close our sessions.
Okay,
Okay, just for the recommendations.
I see.
Okay.
So working on Friday.
Yes. We get used to that.
Yeah.
Hello. I think
Hello,
I'm
Professor.
Hi,
I think
Victor.
I'm all set to go. Hi, Dina. How are you doing?
I'm good.
Hi, Victor.
How are you doing?
I'm sorry for this delay and good morning first.
Oh, thank you very much. No, not a problem at all.
Yeah,
Not a-
okay.
It gave me a little, a few minutes to do my last rehearsal.
Okay. Shall we start now?
Whenever you want, yes.
Okay.
I have slides to share.
Okay. You can share it if you need.
Let me see if
You want to
I can.
introduce
Yeah,
Professor?
yes, I will introduce him first. Okay.
Can you see the slides?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So we'll start now. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure today. Is the sound clear?
Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to be with you today in a unique session for Ain Shams University in its 9th conference. The theme of our conference this year is focuses on fourth generation university. The theme fits the Egyptian Sustainable Development Strategy, Egypt Visions for 2030, to achieve a competitive, balanced, diversified, and knowledge-based economy. In addition, it will be characterized by justice, social integration with a balanced and diversified ecosystem, gaining from its strategic location and the human capital to achieve a sustainable development for a better life for all Egyptians. In line with this vision, the transition to fourth generation university has become crucial. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Professor Victor Lima. He has a long CV, but briefly, Professor Lima is a professor of economics at the University of Chicago, where he has served as a co-director of undergraduate studies since 2004, and as a co-director for master program since 2016. He has oversees the design the implementation of 2 separate tracks within the major in economics, one in data science and the other one in business economics. In addition, Professor Lima has overseen the design and implementation of 2 separate master's programs in economics. His research interests cover price theoretical models for non-market sector. Also, it's my honor today to welcome Dr. Dina Rashid from the University of Chicago. Dr. Dina is an assistant dean for international partnership in the University of Chicago. She oversees the international agreements and student exchange between Chicago and institutions of higher education across the globe. Dr. Dina directs the Sawiris program at Chicago, which is an exchange program dedicated towards Egyptian students. Today, Professor Lima will talk today about the innovation and partnership in the age of COVID-19. Professor Lima, we have about from 20 to 25 minutes. The floor is yours now.
Thank you, Professor Wakba, and it's a pleasure and an honor to be here with you today. I have had the good fortune of having students from Ain Shams University in my class, and I have had a delightful time going over these very fundamental price theoretic models. So when I was approached to give this talk, I was asked to talk a little bit about pedagogical innovations and how to bring a program which was somewhat neglected in the mid-90s, all the way up to what we like to think as the leader in economics pedagogy in the United States, and to discuss a little bit how a shock as large and as important as COVID certainly causes problems, but also gives us the opportunity to test and take pedagogical chances that otherwise would be very hard to justify. So my remarks will be basically covering these two areas. I will do this mostly by describing our program, very simple as background for you, and describing also the specific strategies that we followed, which I think were, in hindsight, pretty good. They could have been better had we had better information always, but I think the outcome of what our program is going to look like going forward is going to be very different and much better, actually, than it was prior to COVID. So we paid an upfront cost, but we tried to, how do you say this, amortize the benefit going forward as well. So let me begin here. So fourth generation universities are a response to the demands of modern economic development. So the United States is in a slightly different part of that learning curve, because the universities here are very much integrated with private sector, academics, research, education. But so the scope of American universities is already very broad, but the scope of universities in developing countries is slightly narrow, right? It focuses mostly on education and research, but it sometimes neglects a little bit the link with making that basic fundamental research that takes place in universities accessible to the people who can turn around to really improve people's lives. So I begin from a position where high quality education is the key fundamental piece that allows universities to grow into these institutions that are much more important socially than just helping us to produce education and research. I believe that the case of Chile is especially instructive for Egypt. So Chile in the mid-1980s was exactly in a position where universities were producing good students. They were satisfying the demand, the local demand by firms to staff positions, but there was very little by way of research. I think that was the third stage, which has happened since 1985 to the present. And now Chile really is in a position where the research is happening in universities in partnership with firms. So Chile is slowly inching up towards having the very top end of our university system look like the American system, which I take to be the premier example of what a fourth generation university system looks like. Of course, in the case of Chile, where the really basic fundamental research doesn't happen, that still happens in developed economies. The question was how to produce it locally. And there were basically two policies that they followed, which I think have been incredibly helpful and useful. The first one is, of course, partnerships with American universities. So very clear, direct partnerships with an exchange of students at the PhD level. And initially, you got to ask yourselves, how do you pay the bill, right? Who pays for this education? So initially it was USAID that paid for this, but eventually this system ran itself into a very robust scholarship system produced by the Chilean government that tackled all areas of research. So engineering, economics, biology, medicine. So the very top end of the Chilean, of all Chilean sectors is managed and organized by people who are trained abroad. And this, of course, produces this virtuous cycle where the high productivity at the top end of a hierarchy kind of filters down and is the tide that raises all boats. Now, Chile, of course, is not a perfect system. I think Chile neglected a little bit vocational training and sort of the middle management human capital. So there are some pitfalls in this regard in taking a university system and developing into a competitive one in the style of the United States. But nevertheless, I think the case of Chile is one that would have a very, very informative set of general principles that Egypt could try to follow going forward. So let me tell you a little bit about our department. So the Kenneth C. Griffin Department of Economics is the home of Chicago economics. There's no place in the world like Chicago for economics. People here breathe, eat, drink economics every day. It's a very intense place. It's a place where ideas are highly valued. And it is a place that has a very particular view of what economics is. So one of our great faculty members, my personal favorite economist, because he is the one who wrote everything that I work on, is Gary Becker. And what he outlined in his work and has really lit the path for all of us going forward is the theoretical framework under which all of our training operates, okay? So one of the things that you will see later on as we develop the track in business economics is that it might look a little bit like teaching to the test, but there's a couple places where I'll point out where this sort of statement of the faith, so to speak, comes in and pervades all of the pedagogy that we have, right? All of our students leave being able to think from within a very clearly articulated framework that describes how people will behave in any area of human action, okay? So this is a very, very, very important aspect of Chicago economics, as this is the flip side of the coin, right? It's not that this statement of faith says that anything that anybody else says is wrong. It's quite the contrary. Chicago economics welcomes criticism. It welcomes debate. You have departments where, you know, to give you an example, two of our Nobel Prize winners, Gene Fama and, oh, I forgot his name, Nudge, Dick. Dina, you want to help me out? Well, anyway, he's the behavioral finance professor, and you have Gene Fama, who is all about efficient markets. So you would think, well, you know, efficient markets are the application of the Becker economic approach. The behavioral approach is exactly the opposite. So how can they coexist in a department that has a very clear statement of what good economics is? Well, from that debate is where this system gets reinforced, addressing the criticisms, addressing the failings, addressing the shortcomings. So Chicago is a very exciting place in which to learn and teach economics. Okay. So what is the objective today? Well, to discuss the strategies that our department has followed, so to keep the training of our students at an optimal level, right? To keep being leaders in the pedagogy in economic sciences. And then, of course, to discuss how COVID has given us space to implement a variety of pedagogical innovations that are, of course, in the direct benefit of our students. So let me tell you a little bit about what we do. So you'll see here that to get a degree in economics, you only need 13 classes. That is a very big difference relative to most departments outside of the United States, where taking economics means usually taking 3 or 4 economic classes per semester, each of the 4 or 5 years that you are a student in the program. For us, where we believe that liberal arts education is really the way to train young people, right? We've limited that to the 13 key classes, which can be separated into 4 key components. Fundamentals, which is basically principles of economics. Core, which is the part where we really go deep into the deep into economics for research, okay? And then empirical methods, because the economic approach always relies on data to verify any theoretical prediction. And then we let students tailor their programs by choosing 4 electives, right? In principle, students could take more classes if they wanted to, but you know, all the studies that we've done over the last 10, 15 years show us that very few students depart from the 13 course requirement. Some will do 14. On occasion, we see a 15, but by and large, students really take the opportunity to explore. We grew very fast. Over a period of 10 years, we basically doubled our enrollments. Now, I know that Ain Shams University is very large, so I'm almost embarrassed to tell you that we have 450 majors in economics. That might seem like a very tiny number, but for us, it's very large. And it doubled. It went from about 220 to 450 over a period of 4 or 5 years. And when programs grow that fast, they typically don't grow in a homogeneous way. So we had students with very different interests joining the program. Of course, we had the data science revolution in the middle of this as well. So what did we do? Well, we diversified and we specialized our degrees, or the options that students had to satisfy the requirements of the degree is a more precise statement to make. So what did we do? Well, we created a track in business economics in partnership with the Booth School of Business, and we created a specialization in data science, right? So the students interested in empirical economics would have an opportunity to specialize a little bit further without having to overburden them with additional courses in economics. And it allowed us to target, as a program, employment for our students in the big tech companies. So places like Facebook and Uber and Lyft, Amazon, right? Now hire our students, pretty much every year. So let me talk about the track in business economics, which I think can be of greater interest than the one in data science. So what we observed was that, in a sense, we were over-tooling our students. We were giving them a whole lot of mathematics with very little practical application within the classes. So we opened up an alternative track that stayed true to the fundamental principles that govern our pedagogy. So this statement by Gary Becker that I mentioned early on, and the emphasis now was to give them the applied work that they could port directly into a professional environment. So that the pedagogical challenge was to avoid telling them, here is a form that you fill out. You're going to have to fill out this form every year for the rest of your life. So why don't we spend an entire quarter learning how to fill it out, right? That sort of piecewise learning approach that doesn't have a unifying framework underneath does not produce people who we expect to be leaders in their respective fields when they hit mid-career, right? It doesn't give them that growth opportunity to really take a step back and say, oh, I understand. The reason I'm filling out this form is because, and then you have all of the options available to you to grow and progress in your career. So that was the pedagogical challenge. The other one was to develop other complementary skills like teamwork, writing, and presentation skills that are complements to the nature of the applied work they're going to be doing in their work. This is a very different type of training than the students who complete the standard track get. Those students typically, they learn heavy econometrics, a lot of mathematics, and they have a very deductive approach to their learning. You set up a system of assumptions, a system of axioms, and you derive results from it, and then you test those results. These students, in contrast, they learn based on cases, based on examples, and then their learning ability allows them to extract the unifying thread from the examples that we provide. So it's a slightly different. One is more of an inductive type of learning. The other one is more of a deductive or abductive type of learning, okay? And then in terms of management of programs, this required a development of internal partnerships across divisions, okay? So when I say divisions, I don't mean just the Booth School of Business, which is responsible for the business electives in this track, but the key innovation is this perspectives requirement. that every student must complete. So if you compare the standard track to the business economics track, all we really did was sort of stretch it out a little bit, right? So we allow them to begin with the fundamentals, which is not required for the standard track. Then we focus on methods. So courses like game theory and behavioral economics on the one hand, courses on monetary systems, international trade and public finance on the macro side, empirical methods always, because data rules king always. And then the perspectives requirement, which forces them to go outside of the economics department into the rest of the university to look for courses that relate to the interest that they have, to the professional interest that they have. Okay, so we kept this liberal arts idea in our program, right? The Booth School, for example, doesn't allow open access to any course. It requires that students diversify across different buckets of courses. So you can't just do accounting, right? You have to do accounting, you have to do finance, you have to do marketing, you have to do operations, you have to pick from different buckets and put together a portfolio of classes that is sensible, given, of course, your professional aspirations. We made it a very flat structure. So the standard track required lots of prerequisites going into the degree, almost like a math degree, where, you know, before doing real analysis, you have to do calculus. Before doing complex analysis, you have to do real analysis. And you need complex to do differential equations and so on and so forth, right? That's how our track looked. Here, once you've done principles, the entire set of courses opens up for you. So you have a lot of flexibility, and students are able to arrive to the point of interest as quickly as possible, okay? So as I said before, the perspective requirement emphasizes that there is education to be had in the university outside that is critical to this training that we are providing. So how did we implement this? Well, we created what we call pods, okay? So what the pod does is it requires that students plan out their training from the very first year they arrive. So whereas a standard track has a very clear path forward with very clearly stated goalposts, right? You complete your core, you complete your econometrics, and then in the last year, you go and do your electives. Because the structure of the business economics track is flat, right? There's a potential for a lot of disorganization. So what students do is they produce their 4-year plan, and they include not only the electives they take in our department, but the electives they take at the Booth School, and also the perspectives courses that they're going to use to supplement that education. So the pods are the way to exploit the complementarity between economics and all other fields. Now, the all other fields is certainly dependent on what the students want to do going forward. So somebody who wants to be a business analyst, for example, will choose a different set of perspectives courses than somebody who wants to work in management or somebody who wants to be in human resources and the like. So here's a couple examples of what we mean by pods. So students will come to us with their plan. They want to work in entrepreneurship. So they need to satisfy the requirements of the degree, they need to look for courses in economics, they need to look for courses at the Booth School, and then they need to go explore outside. So, for example, a course in industrial organization or a course in innovators makes a whole lot of sense. Innovators is a history of innovation course, which explains in different fields, but very particularly in art, how different conceptual and experimental innovations take place. So it gives students sort of an understanding of where good ideas and important ideas, influential ideas come from. Industrial organization tells you a little bit about how to position your firm, right? It's related to strategy. Building the new venture tells you the details of how to go and put a firm together, okay? But then mechanical engineering, for example, turning science and innovation into impactful technologies, is a course where they learn precisely how to go about positioning their innovation in a market setting to be ultimately as successful as possible. So as an example, some of our students have put together Pinterest. I don't know if you're familiar with a social app called Pinterest, but this is an app that was developed to a great extent by University of Chicago students. There's also a party game called Cards Against Humanity that was produced by a group of our alums as well. So by asking them to think through what those course plans are, it really gives them ownership and agency over their future. Okay. Sorry, I'm trying to move my. So students who are interested in finance, right? Well, they'll take their basic finance education, introduction to finance or corporation finance. But then, if you're going to be a business analyst who specializes in a particular sector, you're going to have to understand where the innovations are coming from. You're going to have to understand which of the firms are likely to become the winners, which are doing proper and important innovation. So courses like biological materials and cellular neuroscience will give you some fundamentals of what that science is what's happening in the science at the moment, and is going to place you in a position to succeed ideally, right? And then here's sort of one where we address labor and human resources, right? So experimental methods, labor economics, and then courses in negotiation and labor force and employment, which is essentially a course on the history of unions, really gives you a very well-rounded basic understanding of the field that you're going into. So let me point out that these pods are the ones that we designed to give us examples, but there are as many pods as there are students, because every student has a slightly different interest from their partner or from their colleagues. Okay. So then came COVID, right? So things were marching along very nicely. The tracks were developing, students were getting good training, and then we have this major disruption, which is COVID. And the point that I made at the beginning is that a crisis, certainly causes problems. It requires us to adapt fairly quickly, but it also gives us opportunities, because now the default is that everything is going to be a disaster. So anything that you do to make it better is welcome. And then that leads us to be able to take perhaps risks that under normal circumstances we would be very hesitant to take, especially when things are going reasonably well. So ideally, the improvements that we'll be able to generate will be permanent, right? But some of the challenges we faced were foreseeable. I mean, obviously, if you're not in a classroom with students and you have to teach across a computer, that's a foreseeable challenge. So having good connectivity is something that needs to be resolved fairly quickly. But other challenges were certainly not foreseeable. For example, the struggle that our students had working in groups, right? So the first response in the first quarter, the first response to being in a remote environment was to assign projects, right? It's easier to assign a project, it's easier to evaluate, there's less risk of cheating and the like. But what that did not consider was the fact that students were having a very extremely difficult time collaborating with each other. And in all the surveys that we've carried out, the main complaint about COVID has not been delivery of material, has not been access to resources, it has been access to their friends and the ability to learn from them and teach them. That has really been the biggest issue we faced. So what did we try to do? Well, we tried to get students to focus their attention a little bit, right? So when students are in a liberal arts setting and they're taking courses all over the place, sometimes, taking a course in political theory doesn't really line up with a course in real analysis, and it leads to a little bit of frustration. So what we tried to do was to pump up this idea of a pod, which is in a sense a very broad set of courses, to offer them the opportunity to take courses that were specialized within a field. So we produced these course bundles, okay, which we hope will become the first pillar of our post-pandemic track in business, okay? So what are they thought as? They're thought of as an immersion, okay? And the fundamental part is that they're supported by co-curricular activities that are provided by our Office of Student Advancement. So this is in partnership, directly in partnership with the private sector, not one particular partner, right? We don't take one consulting firm like McKinsey and sort of give them all the business. Rather, we reach out to the right partner for the right component of the course, okay? So bringing these activities into the classroom in a systematic way is the second pillar of our post-pandemic business econ track, okay? So there's a lot of benefit to this, not just pedagogic, not just to the students enrolled in the course, but also to our alums who are always eager and excited to come help us. So we've had a lot of success in bringing them back to campus, making them feel a part of what we do, right? That they never leave, in a sense. They're always there to help out. So it fosters a sense of community within our majors. It's also fantastic for networking, right? Students get to meet their friends who are doing what they want to do, and they also get, informally, they get a lot of advice. So we basically produced 3 immersion programs as pilots to test out the system. And they all were designed to address some area that would be of particular interest to students. So one was very, very COVID related, and that was our macro and supply chain bundle, right? So a disruption as large as COVID is likely to disrupt supply chains. So making sure that students get a good understanding in the right moment to understand the field was critical to the choice, right? So, so there we brought in courses in money and banking, financial accounting, and supply chain management to take advantage of all the synergies across the courses, and because it's a very topical program. So here's a sample of the co-curricular activities that supported the supply chain immersion. So we brought a student from a consulting firm who discussed practical issues in supply chain management, right? So one thing is to learn the mathematical model or the case that describes a particular situation. A very different thing is to have a hands-on discussion with a practitioner going over those methods. And then we had another panel with members from a variety of firms to discuss exactly how supply chain management works itself into a firm. These are very micro issues that never get discussed in a microeconomics course, for example, right? What are the differences in supply chain management if you're looking at consumer goods or industrial products, oil and gas, pharmaceuticals, and so on and so forth. So this immersion addressed the topical one, right? The next one, oh, sorry. So the side benefits. So our students are very much focused on what their peers tell them, not on what we tell them. So when we have meetings with students to discuss any kind of material, right, or career advice or course advice, these conversations always begin with, my friends told me that, right? And 90% of the time, what their friends told them is completely wrong, right? Because that friend heard from another friend who heard from a different friend who heard from another friend who we told something. So by the time they get the information, it's completely distorted, right? So what these panels do is they give us a lot of credibility with the students because they actually now understand that what we were telling them was actually good advice, right? So in more informal settings, right? After we finish the training session, the hardcore economics and business training, when we have our informal gathering. Obviously, these days it's online, but in the future in person. Our panelists also talk about the courses that they took, how other ancillary skills end up being quite fundamental. Writing skills are critical, right? Even more so than an econometrics course, probably, for future success. How to think in terms of the big picture. Why our major requires courses like macroeconomics, and we don't just let them go crazy taking business school courses? Why, like Gary Becker said at the beginning, why this framework that pervades all of our teaching is the critical tool that we give them as we send them out into the world. It's the ability to think from within the framework and apply the framework to situations that they have not yet encountered that is going to actually make them successful. And then my own personal favorite, the University of Chicago, as part of its liberal arts education, has a very important set of courses which are called the core curriculum, which go over readings in humanities and social sciences and mathematics, the hard physical sciences. And a lot of the reading is done by way of original authors. So as a side note, as part of the Sawiris program, we implemented the core requirement maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And it's always a lot of fun to meet with the students at the end of the first quarter who completely hate their social course. They see no purpose in taking this. Why can't I take another econ class? Then when we sit at our lunch in winter quarter, it's like, it's really not that bad. And then when we sit at our final lunch in the spring quarter, they're like, oh my God, my favorite course was Soc. It's unbelievable. It's the classes that really open their mind, right? We teach some very specialized work, sometimes quite technical, but the courses where they really go and they read the philosophers, the big thinkers, they get the sort of the real lay of the academic and intellectual land is in the core. So it's support for the core as well, which I think is what makes the University of Chicago, in terms of the social sciences anyway, quite a unique place to be. The second immersion bundle addressed a neglected skill, and that was writing. So we put a writing course at the center of that immersion bundle, and then we had 2 classes that were going to work with the writing program to produce the proper and adequate set of assignments that would teach them how to write professionally, right? So that's another personal favorite. And then we brought in people from a lot of different firms who showed them exactly how the writing is done, how to write for different audiences. In consulting, for example, writing for a lawyer is a very different activity than writing for one of their economist colleagues. So learning how to address the proper audience was a pretty important skill to develop. And that's one of many skills that we attempted to give them some exposure to. We also have, by the way, students who want to be journalists. So for them, the writing is absolutely critical. And then the final one was one that we knew students would absolutely love. And that's the, I forgot to change the courses here, but I'll tell you what they are. The courses are a course in game theory, a course in behavioral economics, and a course in social neuroscience. So students are always very interested in understanding exactly how it is that the rationality assumption works in economics, and they never believe that people happen to be as rational as we claim they are when we carry out our work. So the course really interwove the fundamental game theory, which is a rational approach, with the behavioral critique, and then provided the science to support why one or the other might be more adequate. And this was, I think, the big winner of the three immersion bundles. So who did we bring in? Well, we brought people to talk about auctions. We brought people in to talk about matching access to education is one of the most important issues we're facing right now. And a lot of this is done via lotteries. So understanding how those slots are assigned is very important. We brought somebody to talk about nudges, how to improve people's access to health insurance and to make sure that they're using it adequately. And then we brought in somebody to talk about how experiments are set up in a big tech firm. So all of this is, I want to emphasize, academic. This is not a description of the job they carry out. These are practitioners who give us a set of readings that they discuss in context of the work that they do, right? Which sometimes is different from the work that an academic will carry out. So going forward, I hope that these immersion bundles will be pretty fundamental. The one thing that we did learn, and I think going forward will help us substantially, is 3 classes is an immersion that is too deep. That's the feedback we've been getting from students. So what we'll probably do is have pairs of courses rather than groups of 3. And I think it'll be a lot easier to manage also post-COVID. So that's what I have. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you and tell you a little bit about what we're doing at the University of Chicago. It's been a pleasure. I want to thank Professor Wahba for the invitation and Dr. Rashid for all the advice in attempting to produce what I hope was an engaging presentation. And don't forget that we're happy to be partners. If you want to talk further, if you want to discuss more, please think of your friends over in the United States, because we're more than happy to jump on a Zoom call and talk in more detail if you find it productive on your end. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Victor, so much for this great talk and letting us know what's happening in one of the most rigorous economics departments in the world over COVID. I will now thank you, Dr. Hayam, for co-chairing the session with me. And I will now open the session for a short, brief Q&A. I wonder if we can let some of the participants come with their voice, or should we just read their questions? I'm not sure about if everybody has access to the microphone or if everybody's muted except the chairs and the speaker. Okay, I have one question from Michael Bishai until we figure whether the rest of the attendees can use their own microphones. So Michael Bishai from Sawir Scholars 2019-2020 is asking, he's wondering if there has been any course additions to the department specifically dedicated to the economics of pandemics or market design for vaccine treatments allocation.
So we haven't had a course on COVID per se, but COVID has pervaded all the teaching that we do, right? So in every elective course where there is a possibility of talking about, say, anything related to health, vaccine production, market structure, pharmaceutical industries, the examples have all been very quickly incorporated into the classroom. It was very interesting to see that on roughly March 10th, when the university really went remote, over the next 5 months, the Becker-Friedman Institute, which is the institute that collects all economists on campus. So not only in the econ department in Booth, but that public policy school and elsewhere, they put out, I don't know, 75 papers on COVID within the first month of the pandemic. And of course, a lot of those papers made their way into the classes themselves. You know, the models where you discuss how the pandemic spreads and dynamics went into macro courses immediately that same quarter. Even our chair, Robert Scheimer, wrote a beautiful paper on that, and it was taught to our students that spring. And then next year, we will have a course on market design offered in the fall. And I'm certain that Joe Root, who's going to teach that class, a young assistant professor, will incorporate quite a bit of COVID. But there was no course titled, the economics of pandemics or anything of the sort. Yet. Yeah. I'm sure somebody's gonna do that at some point.
Any more questions to Professor Lima? I know there were a couple of people who are interested in not attending and asking. I just can't see them. I can't see their hands. Let me see. There's okay. There is another one. I don't know, Victor, if you can see that with me or not, but it says, where do you stand on the equity versus nationalism of vaccine distribution? Do you think the market has operated properly on that end?
You know, all the news that I read is pervaded by different ways of allocating the vaccines. You know, Chicago economics and always deals with the positive side of things. What is, right? So what has happened? What's the evidence? What's the data? The normative side of economics, the should side of economics, is a very difficult one because it's very hard to axiomatize in a way that is completely value-free, right? So what one might think is a reasonable way to allocate the vaccines, somebody else will think is completely insane, right? So there certainly is inequity. I think third world countries have much less access than the countries that are producing those vaccines. I think the quality and the level of that vaccines is completely different. I mean, the BioNTech Pfizer vaccine, which goes directly into the messenger RNA, is one thing. The Sinovac, which is a Chinese vaccine, which is basically the same vaccination we had when Jonas Salk did polio, tells you that the difference in research and science are vastly different across the world, even across the two biggest economies in the world. Has it been done right? That's a really difficult question to answer. You know, if you can find a value-free objective, minimizing the number of deaths, for example, which is really hard to quibble with, you might have a foothold into that problem, right? But going the other direction, right, focusing on the characteristics of the individuals who are receiving the vaccines, is always going to lead to trouble because some people are going to think that they themselves are the ones that should go first, right? I mean, that's always the trouble. I think in a couple of years, when we have the data and we see how exactly the vaccine rolled out, we will have a very clear sense of whether things were done right or they were done wrong. The other, of course, empirical issue is that we never see the counterfactual, right? We don't know that if we had used a different system that we would have had a better outcome. So it's a very, very hard question to tackle from the economic point of view, is my sense.
Professor Wahda, you have a question?
Yeah, I'm afraid to say his time is out now. And I would like to thank Professor Victor for your timing and for your presentation. And we are wishing to see you again in Egypt, inshallah. And thank you, Dr. Dina, for your cooperation with us. And wishing to see you again, inshallah, in the next conference. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hayyan.
Thank you, Professor Victor. Thank you.
Thank you. It has been a pleasure.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.